Cotter Pike woke to the sea screaming. He had heard storms claw Eastwatch all his life, wind that clawed at stone and salt that stung the eyes. The shivering sea had 1,000 voices, but this was a new one, a long tearing cry as if the tide itself were being dragged by rough hands. The lamplight in his tower went thin and brittle. He rose dressed and armed, and when he flung the shutter, the night beyond looked chiseled out of glass. "Rouse the piers," he barked into the stairwell. "Signal the castles. Fires high." Nah. Below, the garrison spilled out. Hard men stumbling as if drunk in the sudden cold, breath smoking like incense. The sea had drawn back from the stone quay so far that mussels and slick weed glistened on black steps, never seen dry in living memory. Fish flopped on blue-black sand. In the distance, a ridge of water hunched like the back of something about to leap, frozen mid-curve. The world was holding its breath, and the wall beside him sighed. Deep, groaning ice that rasped like a giant clearing his throat. "7 bloody hells," a voice whispered. "The tide's gone to bed. It don't sleep." Cotter spat brine in anger. "Get the men off the quay. Pull every boat." A horn sounded from the darkness beyond the harbor, a single note that spread like a crack through the night. The sound found the ice, and something answered in it. An old thing that remembered older songs. Cotter felt that answer in the meat of his teeth. He had been a bastard no lord wanted, and a boy the sea almost drowned. Fear was no stranger, but this was a different guest. It wasn't his fear. It belonged to the world. The ridge of frozen water shivered. Out on the blackened flats, shapes burst from the hard sheen and scuttled forward. Crabs, not crabs, men, not men. He saw long shadows with knives of pale fire, and behind them, a frost that moved like a thought through trees. "Archers," he snapped. "Light 'em. Burn them twice." He did not have to say twice why. Men ran, torches bobbing, tar smoke whirling. The horn blew again, nearer, the cry of something old and cold and triumphant. Above them, the wall moaned. When the crack went, it went like lightning. Cotter felt the tremor in his boot soles, and across the face of the eastern ice, a silver vein split and raced upward, leaping from fissure to fissure as if they were eager to meet. A sheet slid, screaming, and the night burst into white shards. The easternmost span of the wall, where it gripped the sea like a tooth in a gum, sloughed off and crashed down into the hungry black. Steam roared up like breath from a cave. Men shouted. Cotter shoved a frightened boy aside, grabbed a rope, and bellowed over it all as the world remade itself in falling ice. The sea took what it wanted, and then came rushing back, bearing shattered blue. Out there, the long shadows moved unfazed upon the floating pieces. One raised a sword of pale, curving crystal, and where it pointed, the surf stilled. It froze into a new floor. Men ran on it. Not men. Cotter Pike, Eastwatch by the sea, who had tasted brine before mother's milk, who had fought wildling raiders on slippery piers, watched the wall open a wound to the sea, and knew a story had just ended. In the rookery, the ravens set their wings to the cold and showed their black eyes, as if even birds knew what words must be carried south. The letter reached Winterfell with ice still burning the wax. Eddard Stark stood beneath the heart tree with the scroll in his glove and his breath thin before him. Dawn set the weirwood's carved eyes bleeding red rain across the pool, and the mists from the hot springs breathed against the white bark like a sleeping beast. The words of Cotter Pike were blunt and hard as pebbles in a boot. The wall was broken at the sea. White shadows, swords that drank the fire, dead men walking. He'd seen war letters. This was not one. This was a prayer to no god he knew. He read it twice, as if to force it to be a different letter the second time. It did not oblige him. Catelyn found him there. She came quietly, walking the stones with a care that was habit rather than fear. A woman who had made a home in winter because her husband's life was pledged to winter. She touched his elbow, felt the tension in him, and did not ask at once. She looked up instead, into the branches riven with faces. "What does the wall say?" she asked at last, which was not a question most wives could make. "That it is less a wall than it was yesterday." His voice made steam. "Eastwatch. A span fell into the sea. Things came with the tide. Cotter Pike sends ravens to every castle, every hall. Mormont sends another. Mormont sends another. Is it true then? Truly true? The tales?" "He believes it. He was not born to book terrors." He handed her the letter. Her eyes moved quickly, the way a mind learned to count the wars of others. "Jor Mormont says the same." Lewin's voice came across the rime-stiff grass. The maester's chain winked like thin ice. He had a second scroll in his hand, sealed with black wax. The ravens blacken the sky from the shadow tower to Last Hearth. Lord Stark, the Night's Watch, begs help, and not with soused meat and spare boys. They beg for swords, they beg for fire, and the stones that burn white shadows. "Dragon glass," Ned said. "Aye. The wall is far," Catelyn murmured, "and yet no distance when the dead walk." "The king must be told," Lewin said. "Jon Arryn will read what is true in this." "Jon Arryn," Ned said, and for a moment his breath shifted. He had fought at the side of Robert, and at the side of Jon Arryn he had learned what it meant to hold a realm when the swords were sleeping. "He will, Robert. Robert will laugh first, but he will come if I tell him I need him." "The boys," Catelyn said. Robb at 14, shoulders broadening, trying to catch his father's stride and failing only in length. Jon a step behind, quieter, soaking in scowls from servants who swallowed the word they did not speak in his presence. Theon loud, bright as polished iron, wanting to be where men could see the glitter of him. Sansa's red hair, Arya's mud, Bran's steady hands on the ledges of the Godswood, Rickon small and wild-eyed as a fox kit. All of them too young for the world that had just shifted. "We keep them behind stone and steam," Ned said. "We send riders to Manderley. He must provision the coast. We send to the Umbers, Karstarks, Tallhearts, Hornwoods, Mormonts. The North will pull together or not at all. And we search the stores for obsidian." "Lewin?" There was talk of cache places. The oldest men muttered of bits of old black glass tucked away since after the building of the wall. "No. I have searched those tales before and found only old men and their old wives." The maester made a rueful face. "But I will turn the stones again. Dragonstone has the stuff. If the king believes, Stannis can ship it." "Stannis will ship if his brother tells him to," Catelyn said. "He cannot say no to a realm. He can say no to a man. Ned, send to Jon Arryn before you send to Robert. The hand will make the king hear the words." "Nay. Nay." Ned nodded and let the godswood breathe around him once more. The sigh of leaves that were not leaves. He knelt because he had always knelt, and the face in the trunk seemed to look beyond him, through him, past him, like a father too old for children's quarrels. He thought of Lyanna, whose name the stones kept. He thought of a promise in a wind that smelled of roses and blood. He thought of the dead and those who would join them if he did not move quickly. "Bring the riders," he said. "Wake Hal with the garrison. Take down ice." "Nuddy, us." Catelyn's hand tightened on his sleeve. "In the hall. They will see it. They will know." "They must," he said. "We will send fear south in iron and truth with the ravens." On the training yard, the cold made the boys loud. Robb and Jon had stripped to linen and sweat, and Theon laughed obnoxious around them, balancing a practiced spear on his palm. The sky was thin blue. The sun had a weak courage. Sweat steamed off shoulders as the three of them crashed and spun and fell. "You telegraph with your hips," Jon told Robb, eyes bright and unkind only in their exactness. "I can read the swing. Take another swing and see if it still reads." "You both move like cats," Theon declared, puffing up. "But cats don't win wars." He pitched the spear point toward the roofline where frost limned slate. "Men with salt in their blood win wars. If I had a ship—" "You don't," Robb said, and laughed as he said it, gentle with a friend he wanted to keep. Ned watched from the shade of the tower. He saw Caitlin come to the edge of the yard and fold her hands against the cold. For a moment, he let the sight of the boys be the thing it had been yesterday. Then he stepped into the light and everything in the yard shifted subtly toward where he was. "Enough," he said. "Arm yourselves as men." There was something in his voice the boys heard. Theon's smile faltered and then reasserted itself in a different shape. Robb straightened. Jon turned and looked at him as if the godswood had spoken through Ned's throat. In the east, Jeor Mormont watched the ravens go like black snow into a blue that did not warm. "They'll think us mad," Bowen Marsh said, cheeks raw, beard hoary with rime. "Old wives' tales made meat. They'll think what they like," the old bear said. "I would rather be mad and alive than sane and dead." Benjen Stark had a winter's face and a summer's patience. Both had served him. Of all the rangers he could ask to ride with him now into the gap at the sea, Benjen was the one he trusted to count heads honestly. "The eastern breach is no skirmish," Benjen said. "Cotter's men are holding the pier as a point of pride or stubbornness. Both look alike from a distance. They won't hold it long. We need to draw the bastards onto something where they can bleed heat into something that isn't us." "No. Heat," Aemon Targaryen murmured from his stool by the brazier. The children knew in the first long night. Fire and the black glass. Old bones remember more keenly in this damp. "We'll fetch what we have," Jeor said. "We'll burn the pier rather than let them have the wood. Benjen, take the half-hand and the best of the first and go down the east road. Find Cotter if he lives. Fall back and burn as you go. We meet at Queen's Crown and make a stand. If Eastwatch must be abandoned." Bowen made a sound. Jeor cut it off with a look. "We abandon it. The wall is not stone. It is oaths and means. If we must move our oaths south 2 miles, we will." Benjen nodded. "I'll go." Aemon lifted his blind eyes. "Send the boy who listens when the trees are talking. The bogs will be our friends now, if any remain to us." "The bogs are leagues away," Jeor said. "Leagues go faster when a man has no choice." Benjen kissed Aemon's brow as if the old man were made of crystal and would cut him if cracked. Then he went, the half-hand at his shoulder, and the gate boomed open to a wind that knifed. Mance Rayder heard the horn before dawn and wished he'd never learned how to listen. He had been a brother in black until a woman mended his torn cloak with red silk and his life with color. He had danced at 20 fires, wedded and warred until the stories had to tell him apart from the other Mance Raiders by the style of his smile. Most of the time that amused him. This morning, not much did. He stood on a ridge of river ice and looked down at the dark, mounded camps of 100 clans and a dozen doomed peoples, and felt the old oaths pulling at him like tethers. He had broken them. He had broken them for life. Now the dead would show him if he had been a fool. Tormund Giantsbane stomped up and snorted a cloud. The sea went away and came back as a sword, he said cheerfully, as men do who have learned to be cheerful beside disaster. If the ice had teeth, it had been gnawing my toes. Mance glanced sidelong. "We move." "I thought that was the point of running." "Not running," Mance said, and the weight of the horn sound settled in his chest. "Not now. If we blow Jormungand's horn, the wall falls. That's the old song. That's why some want to blow it." "Some?" Tormund grinned. His beard was a pelt of white with red buried in it. "Most. Half my sons want to try it for the fun of it. They'll sing about us if it works. If it fails, the dead will sing about us. Either way, we'll be in a story." "Nah. Gah. You're in enough stories, Tormund." Mance looked toward the white line of the wall and the new brokenness toward the sea. "They won't open for us. Never for us. We're the wrong side of tales. If we blow the horn, the ice will break. But what else breaks when old spells come unstitched?" "You're asking the wrong gods." Tormund scratched his cheek. "You're asking them like they're listening." Ygritte stood a little apart, watching with the careful, fearless curiosity of a woman who had not yet learned to disguise her fear. She had come out of the Skirling Pass with a sharp tongue and a better knife, and she did not care for questions that had only one answer. "They won't open," she said softly. "And if we wait, the cold eats us without needing a mouth. I'd rather die moving." Mance gave her a flat look and then let his mouth soften. "We'll move. South." He tasted the word like a bad ale and swallowed it. "If the horn must be blown, I'll blow it. There won't be songs to tell who did it, but there will be fewer lies." Nay. The thing they called Jormungand's horn lay in a skin-wrapped bundle, as long as Mance's arm, black as old oak and ridged like something grown rather than made. He had wanted it to be false all along. False and ornamental and only currency between liars. But it had the smell of deep soil and thunder about it. He put his hand to the wrappings and felt, absurdly, as if the thing had a pulse. "Get the children with the goats. Put the old ones on sleds. Burn what you can't carry. We go." "South?" Tormund asked. "South," Mance said, and someone laughed dryly at the absurdity of it. The free folk going south to beg the men in stone for mercy. They did not love the laugh. It made more sense than praying. At King's Landing, the small council met in a chamber too warm to take this seriously. The brazier reeked of pine oil. The high windows showed a sky bleached to cloth, and a city that steamed through its own smells. Lord Varys arranged his sleeves like curtains and watched Robert Baratheon try to decide if he was a king who cared. "Letters," Jon Arryn said. He was old and going older, like an elm that had held in 100 storms and would hold in 100 more. "From Castle Black and Eastwatch. They say the wall has broken. They say ghosts piss ice and walk like men," Robert growled. He slapped a hand on the bench so hard a cup leapt and spilled. "They say whatever they say when the drink runs thin. God's balls, Jon, I've my own bogeys." Lord Commander Mormont was not drunk when he wrote. Barristan Selmy said quietly, "I've ridden the North Marches. I've known the men the Watch sends ravens with. They don't write for fun. Nah. Pycelle fussed with his chain. Cold makes men see what is not there. If the summer were not so long, they would not have such long nights in which to invent pleasures of fright." "Pleasures," Renly Baratheon said dryly. "Like the pleasure of being torn apart by walking corpses." Cersei didn't laugh. Her green eyes were lidded with boredom that everyone knew was a weapon. She crossed her legs and let the silks whisper. "If the North wants to shake its bones in a story, let it. The North is a choice we all make." "None." Robert looked at her with affection soured by familiarity, and then passed her to Jon Arryn. "Ned says he needs us?" "We have not yet received Lord Stark's own hand," Varys said, his voice all velvet. "But the ravens from the wall fly without banners. The tales they carry are rough. If we wait for a northern lord to say the same words in softer clothes, we may find those clothes walking with strangers' eyes. Send me his letter when it comes." Robert's face moved through impatience to the place he kept obligation. He had known Ned Stark long enough to know what honesty looked like. The hall flickered with heat and noise, and in his chest a memory flared. Ice, cold air, red flowers on a bed of stone. The smell of winter roses came to him sometimes when he least desired them. "We'll send men north. 7 hells. Stannis will be wetting his breeches with plans already. He loves plans as some men love women." Stannis stood straight and estranged in every room. He was there, the master of ships who rarely smiled. Eyes like chips of slate. "Dragonstone's hills are obsidian," he said. "The old name's too pretty. Men with sense call it dragonglass. It's brittle, but it holds an edge. If the tales are true that it kills these white shadows, then we mine it and ship it. If the tales are not true, we ship something that breaks in a fight while the kinsmen look fools. If you want for prudence, you'll wait until a northern letter confirms." "I'll not wait when the old bear says his wall fell like a pastry crust." Robert shoved back his chair and stood. "Barristan, saddle. We ride north." The room breathed out. Cersei's voice went very soft. "You will not. I am king. You are a man who drinks and chases boars and women and thinks that makes a crown, she said pleasantly. If you leave this city, you leave it to me. Do you want your son raised by me with no one to say otherwise? I want my friend not to be alone when his gods go walking, Robert shouted, and there it was, the thing in him that had not gone to fat. I will not be Tywin Lannister, to sit on gold and send other men to die. Barristan, Summons, Dort, Renly, you will govern like a child on a stool. And Jon Arryn will stand beside you and keep your knife on the table instead of under it. Stannis, I'll go to Dragonstone, Stannis said. I'll mine what can be mined. Davos will run the ships to White Harbor. Who? Davos Seaworth. Knighted for onions if you like a jape. He delivers what men need when others want. We'll need more than onions, Robert muttered, and looked at the map on the wall where a painted line of ice ran across a painted land as if it had been meant forever. Ravens crossed that line until it blurred. The caravan that left Winterfell looked small, because everything looked small under the sky that day. Banners ran up poles and lay heavy, weighed down by frost. The yard smelled of smoke and leather and the breath of horses. Mickon the smith brought out a crate of old obsidian arrowheads he had never thought to use except for vanity. The edges winked like sinners' smiles. Hal Malin checked lists, and then checked them again. Catelyn kissed Sansa and Arya until they drew back and then pulled them close again. When she finally released them, it was because she had only 2 hands and more than 2 children. She sent them inside to warm their fingers, and then turned to the grown men. Wyman Manderley will receive our sick and our grain if I ask, she told Ned. He is a gourmand and a gossip, but he is a lord, and his oaths are heavy. He will receive you if I ask, Ned said, because he had known Wyman since both of them had been nearer the age of their sons than their fathers. You will not go yet, Cat. Not until we know where the storm goes. If the dead do walk. We'll not put the girls on the road, she said. They will stay. I will stay. We will let the steam keep us alive. He wanted to argue, but could not find a stone of sense to step on. He stood aside to let Benjen's letter be read aloud a second time in the yard. The one that said he was riding to meet Cotter Pike, and if he did not return, he would return regardless. It was a grim jest, and the men laughed hard at it because the cold had teeth. Jon watched him with a hunger he hid badly. Ned saw the way the boy's eyes fixed on the steel and the numbers and the maps, and knew the talk he had to have was a talk he had had with himself at that age, speaking to a mirror he did not yet know he was made of. You will not ride to the wall, he told Jon later, in the warm dimness of the great hall, while torches bent sparks into the air. You are 14 years old. I am what we need me to be, Jon said. There was no insolence in it, just a terrible clarity. If the wall has fallen, there is no watch to join. There is only a line, and someone must stand on it. None. You'll stand on it, Ned said, but you'll stand where I say. You'll go to the neck. I'm sending riders to Howland Reed. He will need men who can learn to be quiet and harder than water. You are both. You and Robb and Theon will ride with me as far as Moat Cailin. After that, we'll see. Jon bowed his head and did not let the satisfaction show too brightly. Ned loved him for that. He had learned in a house where he was not loved of how to hide the better part of himself. It was a gift and a harm. On the King's Road, they found the wolf. It was a she-wolf as large as a pony, gray and white, her fur rimed with ice and her eyes glazed. A broken antler had pierced her throat, and the dead thing jutted from her like a grotesque crown. Blood had frozen in a black trail across the snow. Around her belly, 6 pups yipped and tumbled and licked at her stiff teats. Not understanding that warmth no longer lived in her. Robb reined in too sharply and nearly bit Snow. Joan's hand shot out to catch his bridle, sure despite the horse's panic. Theon laughed, then choked on it. Mother, Robb whispered. Worse, Theon said lightly to hide the thing gathering in him that Ned could not yet name. A symbol, or a bard's wet dream. Ned dismounted and knelt. The antler was real, the puncture mortal, the irony too near at hand to be chance. He did not look for meaning in every wind-blown leaf, but this leaf had writing carved in it. He turned the body and found the pups. 6. He looked over his shoulder and saw Sansa's red hair at the window slit of the tower wagon, and Arya's brown eyes narrow with energy in Bran's small hands. Rickon slept, his fist around a carved wooden man. 6. Take them, he said. And Catelyn's breath sharpened behind him. They did not die. Some in the world should not. The boys will raise them. And the girls? Catelyn asked. The pack keeps warm around the smallest, he said, and did not look toward the wagon, because sometimes if you did not make a thing a test, it was less likely to be failed. One of the pups, pale as snow and red-eyed, had crawled away from its litter and stood apart like a tiny lord. Jon went to it because he always went to the thing that stood apart and made room beside it because he always had. They named the dogs later in Winterfell's kitchens with laughter and argument. Jon said his could go nameless until it chose its name itself. Ghost followed him like something that had been told to do so by a voice in the roots of the keep. When Jon walked through steam and snow, the dog went silent beside him as if it had been cast from the same strange quiet. In the riverlands of ice and shattered water east of Castle Black, Benjen found Cotter Pike with his beard frozen into a shield against his chest and his left hand blistered black. Cotter grinned as if he wasn't broken and said rude things about the sea, and when Benjen said they'd fall back and burn, Cotter's grin got wider and uglier. "Burn it all," he said. "If we leave them a plank for a toothpick, they'll pick the meat out of our bones with it." They ran and burned and fought and burned again. They learned the new rule quickly and harshly. If a man fell, you set him on fire before your heart could learn his name. The White Shadows came in small companies at first, testing, delighting in panic. They shattered swords as if they were frost on a window pane. The half-hand second died laughing, not because he wanted to, but because his breath froze that way with shock. Benjen learned to carry obsidian like bread. He put 3 black darts in a thing with skin like glass, and the thing screamed in a voice that made Benjen want to rip his ears off. It broke into a drift of spear-sharp ice. They made a stand at Queen's Crown because it had a bit of high ground and a tower that thought it was still a tower if you asked it nicely. The village had been empty since before Benjen had been born. Its stones remembered hands. They piled brush and the brush smoked. They laughed like fools when the smoke worked because laughter helped make a place for fear to sit that was not their heads. Mance Rayder found them there because the world had given up pretending men could not share enemies. He came under a rag tied to a branch that would have been a flag in a kinder world and raised his hands to show he was not carrying the horn. He had it. He did not carry it like a boy with a toy. Tormund rolled behind him like a friendly boulder. A dozen other men stood back enough to show respect and close enough to show this was not a surrender. "I'll not pretend I didn't think on blowing it," Mance said. "A horn makes a man large enough to swallow his own fear for a heartbeat." Benjen's smile was no warmer than the day. "If you blow it and the wall falls, what you run from runs after you faster." "Sense," Tormund said, baffled and pleased. "From a crow." "A crow whose brother is Warden of the North," Mance said. He had the look of a man who saw too much to break quickly, which made him dangerous and useful. "We can't run through you. We can't run back. The only place left is forward, and for that we have to be on the same side of a song at least until we've finished singing." "Speak it plain," Benjen said, though plain was what this was. "Let us through," Mance said. "Let me lead my people south. We'll fight the cold with you. We know it better than any man in a castle ever will. We won't kneel to your gods or your wives, but we'll put our sons in songs wherever you say they hurt the dead." The half-hand spat thoughtfully. "We open to wildlings and we open to wolves. You'll steal sheep and daughters, and before long we're killing each other again while the cold laughs." "Nun. Hun." "The cold doesn't laugh," Ygritte muttered. "It watches." A raven on the ruined tower made a sound like a cough. In the low winter sunlight, everything seemed to take on a glassy precision. Benjen felt Aemon's blind words in his bones. The bogs would be their friends now, if any friends remained. He looked at Mance, at the men behind him with the big patient eyes of people who had outlived kindness, and he thought of Ned at Winterfell and the letter the Ravens carried with his name on it. This decision was too large for a brother officer to make on a tower that thought kindly of itself. "Ride with us to the neck," Benjen said. "Parley under Howland Reed's trees. He'll say what the bog will bear. And if you turn on us, I will put 3 black darts in you before your beard freezes." Mance's smile had humor in it that did not mock. "I know a promise when I hear one," he said. "Move, then." The dead move quicker than men with plans. White Harbor accepted the ships of Stannis Baratheon with a conservative nose. Wyman Manderley sat in his hall under a merman painted so bright the colors themselves seemed to pant with exertion, and smiled like a man whose cooks had proved clever in a famine. "Dragonglass," he said, weighing an obsidian dagger in a hand that could have wrung a goose into stew. "The old tales say it bites the cold. So do spices, Lord Stannis. I'll take both." "Nay." Davos Seaworth stood aside and watched the loaves go past that had been stamped with little swords for luck. He had come a long way for a man once satisfied with onions and a wife's soft hand at night. The knives they pulled from the Dragonmont were weird things, slagged into edges by men who did not trust them, and then sketched in chalk with the good signs the old housewives of Dragonstone remembered from their mothers. Davos had seen more men die than he had fingers. He did not doubt that black glass could answer the pale swords. He did not know how it would answer the other problem. He said as much to Wyman. "You mouth-feeders'll have bellies full of glass and no meat to line them if this weather stays." Wyman's eyes crinkled. "I'll bake glass in crusts and tell the men it's a modish pie," he said dryly. "We'll need full nets and good luck. I can promise one and pray for the other. You've done your part, Sir Davos. Take the thanks of White Harbor and the pies of my kitchens with you." "I didn't do it for thanks." He touched the chips of a hand he had more dearly some days than others. "And don't call me sir like it belongs. It was well done knighting, but done by a king with a hunger. You're a practical man." Wyman leaned forward. "Be me more practical. The sea freezes in stories. It's not a story I want told here." "Tell that to the cold," Davos said, and glanced toward the harbor where his men were unloading black blades that broke if mishandled and would save a man's life if they kissed the right throat. Robert Baratheon rode with 200 from the Red Keep like a man who had been told he had not a day to spare and who still found time for one more drink. He drank less after the crossroads, after the wind began to bite like small teeth rather than gnaw like dull gums. Renly went as far as the Trident and kissed him on both cheeks and made jokes about the northern girl's wool, and Barristan rode on because he was a good man and thus loyal to hope. "Do you remember?" Robert asked him one night, thick-voiced and honest. "Being men whose bodies did what they were told without negotiation?" "Less often," Barristan said. He warmed his hands over the fire and did not look to see how Robert was looking, because sometimes a king needed privacy even when he was speaking aloud. Robert took the hammer down from the wagon where it rode and touched it as a man touches a wife who had forgiven him too many things. "I am going to hit something with this," he said, "and there will be meaning in it, or I will die like I am my own boar." "The king does not hunt this time," Barristan said dryly. "We are the hunted, if the letters tell true." "They do," Robert said, because in that moment he believed, and in that moment he had always been best. "I'll not sit fat while Ned freezes. He did not leave me when I ran out of breath on the last hill." Moat Cailin was a ruin with ideas. The 3 towers rose out of the bog like trapped teeth. Kites nested there. The causeway that ran out of the north into it was narrow and deceptive and had killed more men than any mountain pass when they tried to take it with banners and horns. Howland Reed moved in it like a man moving in his own bones. He came to meet Ned Stark with a weight of old friendship and a lightness that seemed to come from the fact that his house did not stand still long enough for flattery to catch it. "They'll try to freeze the swamp," he said without greeting. "That's the sensible thing for them to do." "Can they?" Ned asked. "They're sensible," Howland said. "Fire and frost are both clever. Frost remembers better than fire, but both have long stories. Mance Rayder watched the little Crannog lord with a fascination he tried not to make a face of. He had not expected a reed to have iron in it. He had not expected a boy to look at him with such green, strange eyes. The boy had a woman's hand on his shoulder, and her hair was dark, and her eyes were calm. The girl's name was Mira, and the boy's was Jojen, and they were Howland Reed's children. "I dreamed of a tower in a swamp," Jojen said, with the confident bleakness of a child, sure that his dreams mattered because they always had. "It bent, it gave, it drowned a sword and drank the cold." "Dream finer things," Theon Greyjoy said. He had a laughter he wrapped around himself when men older than him talked about magic that wasn't wine. "Dream a warm bed for me." "Dream a bath, Theon," Robb muttered. And as always, the gentle cut eased men into liking him. "We will fight here," Ned said, because there was nowhere else to fight, and because the Neck had always been the place where the North told the South it could be approached only under sufferance. It would tell the far North that now. They built fires under planked causeways and smeared pitch on brush piles, and laid clay pots packed with wildfire under mats of reed that Howland's women wove with brutal skill. The green jars sweated wickedly. Alchemists had checked them at White Harbor, and then Reed women had spat on them to make their own safety marks. Micken hammered hasty rings to hold obsidian shards to spearheads. 8 smiths cursed and bled over black glass that cut them when they looked at it wrong. Maester Luwin's fingers ached from writing lists and his bones from running them. Jon learned the bog as if it were a language. The Crannogmen moved soundless in boats no wider than a man's chest. They slid through water that looked solid and walked on ground that looked liquid, and had a way of deciding to be the opposite. He learned to find the highest hummock and to never trust it twice. Ghost took to the place like a white thought, flowing from clump to clump with arrogant ease. Jon found he could think better in silence and barely bore it. Benjen arrived with the wallbiters at his heel and the wildlings at his side, and the look on Robb's face when he saw the 2 columns together was the look of a boy who had realized his songs had been lying. "Your father will be here," Benjen told Robb, clapping his shoulder once, and looked over him at Jon. The touch said what he had no time to say. He had seen Jon last as a boy playing under stone. The boy had a dog now, and looked like a man who was going to get what he wanted or die arguing the point. The others came in the night as people had always said they did, but they moved in daylight too when it suited them. And the day made them look worse. They crossed the bog where men sank to their chests as if the bog were smooth stone. The cold went before them like a herald. Arrows shattered when they struck those pale swords at the wrong angle. The first corpse they raised was a young man from the Rills whose mother had named him so tenderly that Luwin's heart had hurt to write it down. Ned ordered him burned without waiting for her to come north to cry. He stood and watched until the boy was ash. "How many jars?" he asked Luwin. "Not enough," Luwin said. "How many men?" "Not enough," Luwin said. "How many gods?" "As many as will have us," Luwin said, and Ned felt the old laugh rise in him and let it go like steam from a crack in ice. Robert came with noise and banners and hunger, and the moment he clapped Ned Stark into his arms by the shadow of the drowned tower, everything was almost simple again. They had changed as men change, but their bones knew one another as a dog knows its brother by the way it leans against him. "You look like a grave," Robert said thickly, and held him longer than men in peace hold one another. "You smell like a brewer," Ned said, and then softer, in the voice scarcely even Catelyn heard. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." Robert let him go and thumped his shoulder. "Show me where to hit." They showed him. The Neck did not like knights, and it liked pride less. Howland Reed placed them the way a clever hand moves stone pieces on a board that looks simple to men who do not know the rules. Barristan took command of a third of the line because he did not seek command. Good men serve best when they are not thinking about their names. The wildlings took the reeds, the Crannogmen took the deeper reeds, the Northmen took the causeways. The royal host took the most visible place and was held back like a barbed surprise. Ned took ice from its wrappings and let it lie for a long time across his knees before he stood. It was a king's sword. It killed like the winter kills. The battle had no fixed hour. It began whenever a man saw his breath and began to count how many he had left. The first push came with a sound like wind through a flute made of ice. Whites shambled onto the hidden planks that Reed women had woven. Howland stepped back and nodded gently, and the Crannog man standing beside the pot whispered a word and flicked his spark. The mat burned green, and the whites hissed. Fire crawled over water as if it were hungry. The smell was oily and sweet and wrong in a way that made men retch. But the bog boiled, and where the oil slick met the edge of a moving white cloak, the white hissed and drew back like flesh from a brand. The others did not like the fire. They learned quickly. They slid wide and sent their dead across in other places. The battle was a conversation conducted in smoke and bone. Reed's spears shot out like quiet jokes and then withdrew. Arrows whispered. Obsidian points shattered and cut fingers. Men wept bitter water as they saw their friends rise, and then they burnt them. Robert stood with his hammer in his hands and watched a frost come across the reeds like a white mare galloping. "Oh, let's be done with this," he said. And then he galloped himself, because he had been born for the moment when waiting becomes impossible. Barristan shouted, and then laughed because he knew he would never control this king and had stopped trying years ago. Robert crashed into a wedge of whites on the causeway and smashed them into a paste of ice and mud. He laughed as he swung, not because he didn't know fear, but because he knew it too well and knew laughing kept his hands from remembering how to shake. Another came. Ned had seen one from a distance and killed one at the edge of the world with arrows that had taken a day to make and a lifetime to aim. But he had never watched one approach him as if it were crossing a hall. It walked with an elegance that mocked. Its armor was a memory of armor and glass. Its sword curved like a thought he did not want to have. When it lifted its hand, the air went hard. It came for Robert because they always went for the loudest heat first. Barristan leapt to meet it and his sword shattered, and he did not seem surprised. He fell back with economy, as if he had trained all his life to retreat from a thing no teacher had ever dared to describe. Robert swung his hammer and the hammer met the pale blade and sparks flew like stars. The hammer did not break. The blade did not either. The other smiled. An expression like mercy went across its face and then was gone, and the air shrieked. "Robert," Ned said, and then he ran. He did not run quickly enough to be young, but he ran like a man who had always run when the thing he loved most in the world was about to be taken. Ice came up with him, and the great sword in his hands did not feel heavy. The weirwood back in Winterfell had watched him lift that sword with tears like sap. The sword knew the shape of his shoulders and the way his wrists turned when he was tired. He did not shout. He simply placed himself where he must be, and when the other turned the curve of its blade to ease Robert's hammer aside with mock grace, Ned moved in. The first sound was a thin glass chime. The second was a human grunt. The third was no sound at all but a feeling, like a cliff face cracking in sun. The Valyrian steel bit the cold, and found whatever was inside it that passed for marrow, and the Uter's skin went to vapor. For a moment, Ned had the impression of something terrible and sorrowful and unbelievably old, and then he had silver snow in front of him, and the echo of a scream inside his skull. He went to one knee and remembered to breathe. Robert loomed and bellowed triumph and swung the hammer into the next wave of dead men as if he meant to beat the night into pulp. Later, when there was a gap, Barristan pressed Ned's shoulder. The touch said what nothing else could. "You saved a king," Barristan said. "I saved a friend," Ned said. "The king is a costume." On the other side of the bog, Theon Greyjoy stood on a hummock with a torch and shouted defiance, because his fear liked to hear the sound of his own voice. He had killed 3 men with black arrows, and set 2 faces he had known alight with his own hand. He would have been sick if he had had anything left to bring up. Beside him, Jon loosed and loosed again. Ghost went silent into the fog and came out of it streaked with black blood that might have been his own if it had not been so cold. "Behind," Jon said, but it wasn't speech. It was the heir to Theon's left glassing, and then a shape that would have killed him if a frog spear had not thunk into it with a wet sound. Mira Reed slid up onto the hummock like a thought, and grinned at Theon as if she had just found a lifetime's amusement. "You keep your mouth too open," she said. "It lets the cold in." "I use it to thank you," Theon said, not ready to stop being a boy yet, and not ready to keep being one. He burned the thing that had nearly altered him. He thought of the sea, of Pike's knife-edged rocks, of his father's voice like salt in a wound. He had made his rebellion long ago when he laughed with Robb and did not kill him in his sleep. He made it again now when he set on fire a man he had shared bread with, because otherwise that man would try to kill him with a hand that had bullied him in the kitchens. He wondered if the drowned god approved of men who burned what the sea would drown anyway. Mance's horn never blew. He kept it slung on his back in wrappings that collected ice. Twice Tormund shouted at him to use it. Once Ygritte said nothing and watched him with the sharp stillness of a decision forming. Mance put his hand to the horn and did not close his fingers on it, because some part of him believed that the act of holding would become the act of blowing of its own accord. He carried it like a man carries a child he is trying to hide from a battle that will take the child anyway. The cold worked cunning. It went for the water, turned it to glass, made roads where there should be none. It went for the breath in men's throats and slipped in and made their thoughts slow. It went for the bog fires and tried to eat green with white. The wildfire burned despite that, and men who had called the alchemists fools thanked them as if they were saints. Whites burned and screamed and kept moving sometimes, and then you had to shoot the thing that no longer had tendons. The green flames stood on the water and walked like priests. They turned black at the edges and stank like sins remembered in the wrong order. Twice the line nearly broke. Once it broke. It broke under the drunkard's tower when a second other came cloaked in the shape of smoke. It moved differently, with a patience that made men want to run. It walked up onto a causeway none of the Crannogmen had thought to lay traps beneath, because they had been trapping men and not nightmares for 1,000 years. It lifted a hand, and the men there froze where they stood with the hoarfrost jumping from their lashes. "Mine," it said in a voice like memory and cracking crystal. The word was not their tongue, but they knew it with the part of the ear that understands grief. Jon was closest. He did not think. Ghost went at the other with the foolish confidence of a young wolf who had not yet learned about glass. The other grinned. It swung, and Ghost became red on white and then pieces of red. The sound Jon made was small and devouring. He did not say his dog's name because the name was a thing that would break if he said it where this thing could hear. He took 2 steps forward into a death that wanted him, and then stopped, not because he wanted to stop, but because someone's hand closed on the back of his collar with absolute authority. Ned Stark stood there. He held his son, and did not think the word son, because names were as good as spells in some places. He set Jon behind him. He lifted ice again, arms shaking now. The other moved. Time became something else. The second time is never the same as the first. The other knew now that the big sword could bite, and the man wielding it had a mind for killing that did not hunger for it, which is the worst sort. It shifted its blade and found an angle. Ned found another. The metal sang. He stepped back and felt the causeway choose to be narrower. His breath was smoke, his arms lit, his thoughts crisp and terrifyingly clean. In that moment, he understood why some men kill themselves when their wives die. The sight of the child bleeding on the planks at his back opened a door in him and showed him a field that went on forever. He refused to walk onto it. He stepped forward also. Robert came in like an avalanche he had decided to be. He hit the other with a blow that would have taken a horse's head off and staggered when the hammer bounced. He laughed. It was not a sane laugh. Barristan's hand was on his arm and then off again. He did not interfere with the thing he had waited all his life to see, because some forms of loyalty are to stories as much as to men. Ned pivoted, brought ice down, and the other slid aside like light. It hissed. It lifted its sword. Mira Reed's frog spear took it in the side where a man has no organ, and a thing like this may have had one, and it turned like a cat startled by a child. That fraction of a breath was enough. Ned did not think. He swung like a man felling a tree that had been his friend, and the thing broke into shards that did not cut because they had no will to them any longer. He stood gasping, hands trembling now, and fumbled his way to his son. John was on his knees with his hands clamped on the ruin of white hair and red, and he would not let anyone touch what had been his and was dead. Ned had no words men could use. He put his hand on the boy's head and felt the coarse, cold hair. He looked at the line and saw it ripple. "We stand," he said, and the men nearest him turned the word into a thing that lived in their throats. They stood. They stood while Catelyn Stark's hands bled raw helping Reed women lay reeds. They stood while Davos ran his ships up into the White Knife farther than sense because the river did not want him, and he did not care. They stood while the world's long breath went in and did not come out for a very long time. When the others drew back, it was not because they were afraid. It was because something in the bog had learned them. The children of the forest showed themselves only at the corners of eyes, and the songs they sang moved water. The reeds drank cold. The causeways shifted. The dead began to have trouble finding their feet. It was no victory. It was a reprieve. And men who had learned to count the days survivors count knew the difference. Robert wanted to push. It was in him to push. Ned caught his arm and shook his head once, hard enough to make a brother remember the boy he had followed to dawn. "We hold," Ned said. "I want to smash the night," Robert said, and his eyes were wet, whether with cold or grief for the white dog Ned did not know. "I want to push them to the broken wall and smash them through it and make a littler sea with their bones. And leave your men in ice," Ned said. "Give them their wives' grief without their bodies. We hold. We build. We teach men to cut black glass without cutting themselves. We tell every lord south of the neck to send us his fat and his axes. We make the neck a wall." "Num, Daddy." Robert breathed and breathed. His breath steamed. "All right," he said, letting the word be a hammer he did not swing. "We'll hold. We'll drink something hot and foul, and we'll hold." The holding took a kind of courage men do not make songs about because it is made of mornings. They put the watch at Moat Cailin and called them the Watch because you cannot change an oath without breaking it. Jeor Mormont swore again under branches that had not known vows since the days when the first men made them. Aemon listened and smiled as if he could see the faces men made. Benjen took the first post. Qhorin Halfhand went east to the bog trails and did not come back for 3 days. When he came back, he brought 6 children and a woman with hair white as lard and eyes like night. She spoke a language that had never bothered to be written, and Jojen understood enough of it to know she was telling them to keep their feet on the living parts of the world. He told Ned, and Ned had reed men mark the living ground with bones and braided reeds, and once that saved 100 men who would have stepped wrongly. Catelyn sent for armbands of green leather, and had Mira tie them on to men who had learned to move in the bog, as if they had been born to it. She did this from the great hall, her hands no longer soft with a lady's massages, but hard with a woman's work. She found time to sit with Arya when Arya cut her thumb trying to whittle a spear, and told her that she would do it again and again until the wood wanted to be a spear. She sat with Sansa, and helped her stitch cloaks lined in fur for children who had none. And when Sansa cried because her stitches were not as fine as Septa Mordane would want, Catelyn kissed the bungled seam and told her that warmth had a beauty of its own. Theon Greyjoy wrote no letters to Pike. He went to the Merman's court to drink once, and then did not go again because he saw men weighing him with their eyes and choosing him in the scale with Ned Stark rather than in the other. He found he did not want to weigh otherwise. Robb rode lines like a lord. Jon walked lines like a ghost. Ghost was gone, but the name stayed because some losses are so large that you do them honor by stretching their shadow. Jon learned from Howland to move on the living ground, and from Benjen to kill with black stone. He did these things with a quiet that frightened men older than him who did not like seeing something in a boy that they only made for themselves by accident and regret. Winterfell steamed into the cold like a beast breathing in sleep. Bran clambered where he should not, and watched the smoke from the southern fires rise and rise, and did not ask childish questions, because children in the north learned not to put weight on weak ice. "Do they go away?" he asked once. and Maester Luwin said, "Some things go nowhere. We go away from them." Arya took a frog spear into the godswood and jabbed at her reflection until the water took the spear away. She dove in after it like a mad child and came out blue and triumphant. Catelyn beat her and then held her and then smacked her once more, because sometimes love must be this to make room for fear. When spring should have come and did not, men learned to shrug like northerners. Breadlines stretched in White Harbor, and Wyman fed them, and then fed himself and pretended he was not hungry when he ate. He made a stew of eels and fat and things he did not name and told jokes. He made himself a pig in a story so others could forget they were going without. Davos took his last ship up the White Knife when men said there was no more river to be had, because he had always done the thing men said could not be done. He ran aground twice and cursed like a prayer and got to a place where the ice relented to let him pass. The wall did not heal. It stood broken to the sea, like a jar with its lip chipped off. Eastwatch became a vulture on a cliff. Cotter Pike slept with a hand that would never quite close again. The white shadows came sometimes to test. They did not come in the old flutes and with dances of mockery. They came with what felt like patience. Men learned to wait back at them. One night, when the sky was too clear and the stars felt like cold eyes, Mance Rayder walked down to the edge of a small black pool and took the wrappings from the horn. He held it in both hands. "If I blow it now," he said to no one. "What do you do? Does the neck sing? Does the ice pull up all the rivers and lay them like snakes to bite us? Do you go away, or you come all at once? Why should I think I can be the one who decides when old songs end?" "Because someone must," Ygritte said from the shadows, surprising him. She always did. If a song goes on too long, the words go wrong. He looked at her. "Do you ever wish you were less clever?" "Only when there are boys to impress," she grinned. Then it slid away. "I didn't want your horn to be real." "Neither did I." He grunted and wrapped it up again. "Men like us don't get what we want. We get what the world wants from us." She stepped close enough to press her cold forehead to his arm. "Make the world wait," she said, and Mance laughed without much mirth and did. Robert left Moat Cailin with fewer men than he had brought, and more weight than he had carried. He kissed Ned's cheek when men were watching because he knew that sometimes seeing mattered, and kissed it again when they were not watching because sometimes not seeing mattered more. He rode south with Barristan and looked back twice. Once he saw nothing but smoke and trees, and two ravens quarreling in the sky. Once he thought he saw a white dog on a hummock looking at him with eyes like half-remembered promises, and he did not look a third time because he did not trust the way his heart moved in him. In King's Landing, Cersei took the reins of governance and yanked too hard, and nothing happened because the horse was old and preferred other hands. Renly found he laughed less when he counted barrels of pitch. Pycelle dozed and woke in raid and decided that if he lived long enough, he would write a new book called Things I Thought Were Not True and Are. Varys placed candles in places most men never saw and watched them gutter on nights when the wind had no reason to be in those rooms. "Winter has teeth," he murmured to himself. "Perhaps it has a mouth as well. We would do well not to place our necks near it." "Nay, your metaphors are dull," Littlefinger said from a door where he should not have been. "The only thing I put near any mouth is my coin." "Be careful whom you feed," Varys said sweetly, and smiled in a way that had forgotten warmth long ago. Time became a series of days that tempted men to stop paying attention to how remarkable they were. Someone somewhere found laughter and then forgot why. Someone lit a fire and it burned green, and the child watching it clapped as if theater had come to the village. Someone died and did not rise because their friends loved him enough to burn him quickly. Someone kissed a woman because she was crying and because he was alive. They made a child because that is how the living argue with the cold. The child's first breath smoked in a hall where songs were being practiced for men who would not live to hear them. It was a bitter glory. The last push before the watch truly turned from desperate to daily came at dawn on a day without a dawn. The sky was a sheet of pewter. The others came in a line as straight as honesty. Ned stood below the weirwood banner with his great sword and knew he was too old for this and that he would keep doing it. The line bent at the drunkard's tower and would have been forever if the bog had not decided that it was full and spilled over the causeway in a slush of ancient plants and new dead. It carried 2 white shapes into a fen where reeds drank hungers. They did not come back out with dignity. They did not come back out at all. After that, the white shadows took more interest in the gap in the wall than in the new green line drawn in the south. It galled them to have a place they had always ignored refuse them so thoroughly. The winter that lay on the world did not leave, but it settled into a weight that did not need to press harder to get its way. Men counted. Men stored. Men taught boys to cut glass and girls to tie weirs. Men taught girls to cut glass and boys to tie weirs when it made more sense that way and did not bother explaining why. The songs changed. The godswood learned new prayers. Jon Snow went to the pool and laid a pale hair on the ice that had been ghosts and did not sink because the ice knew whose grief it was. Jojen stood beside him without saying things. Ned did not come because there are places fathers cannot go without making them smaller. He stood in the yard and cut a straw man in half with ice and felt nothing conclusive. Catelyn told stories to Rickon about wolves who lose their tails and then find them again. Arya sharpened a frog spear until Luwin took it from her and gave her another. Sansa began a song and stopped it, and then started again, and this time finished it, even though her hands were shaking. Robb wrote his father a letter he did not send because the boy he was did not know how to speak to the man he was learning he would be. Theon threw 3 oil jars farther than he would have wagered and laughed with Mira when none of them exploded because laughter loosens stubbornness, and both of them had more of that than was good for them. Benjen rode the northern marches that were now the southern marches of a new world, and did not die yet, which felt like theft from something that had claimed him, and would not forget the debt. Ned and Robert met a last time in the new hall at Moat Cailin. No king had sat there since men had thought stone shoulders would hold forever. Robert's face was red from drink and cold and feeling. He had something in his hand wrapped in cloth. "It's a hammerhead," he said, opening it like a good cook showing a pie. "Not pretty. Dragonstone black hammered into iron. It chips. It kills." They say Stannis thought of it and Davos swore at the man who did the making until he did it right. And then Stannis forgot to say thank you. "Did you say it for him?" Ned asked. "I'm saying it now by putting this in your hand." Robert shoved the thing forward. A gift with weight, and the sort of meaning men pretend not to understand. "Have the smith at Winterfell set it to a haft. Give it to the boy when he's ready, not Robb." Ned looked up sharply, then down again because it made grief easier. Jon would not be a lord. Jon would not inherit a keep. But Jon would inherit the North's winter whether he was given a hall or not. "Thank you," Ned said. "I will give it to a boy when he is ready. Don't wait too long." Robert wiped his nose with the back of his hand and looked out through the slit where fog was trying to get inside. "We aren't going to die of old age, Ned." "No," Ned said. "We never were." When Robert rode south this time, he left men behind who did not love him but respected him enough to speak his name without rolling their eyes. He had not killed the winter. He had learned to live with it. That was a different kind of strength. Cersei would not love him for it. The realm would not understand. But the men in the bog who had not expected joy again sometimes found their mouths tasting of something like it at night, when the fires were crackling and their bodies had not been needed for death that day. Years later, men would say that the wall broke in Robert's reign and the world learned to bend. They would say that the Night's Watch moved south and married the Neck and wore green on their black, and that vows become truer when they are remade. They would say that the children of the forest sang men's names into trees that had forgotten men's names, and that those trees looked kinder for it. They would say many things, because men always do, and the best of them would be true in the way a fire is true: warming, devouring, unpredictable. In Winterfell, under the heart tree, Ned knelt and set his hand to the weirwood as if it were the shoulder of an old friend that had not moved in a long time. The carved face bled red sap as the warm water from the spring steamed and rose and curled around the higher branches. The winter in his bones settled into a place he could carry. Footsteps whispered. He did not turn. He knew Caitlin by the difference she made in the cold. "They will come again," she murmured. "Yes," he said, "and we will be here." "We will," he said, and the words went up into the white branches and out into the pale sky and fell back like a promise falling like snow upon a house that would hold against it. Beyond the bog, beyond the shattered sea ice, beyond the broken lip of the world, in a night that had more patience than malice, pale shapes wrote new plans upon the cold. They did not forget. Neither did the living. Between them a narrow causeway ran, with fire's jar set under it, with reeds braided over and frost thinking it could learn to do what water does. On that narrow way, men walked back and forth in twos and in threes and alone, singing low, telling jokes, sharpening stone, making promises. On that narrow way they would stand until it sank. They knew it. They stood anyway, letting their breath write small ghosts into the air, and then letting those ghosts go. The pack kept its shape around the smallest, and the old swords did as they were told, and the world moved forward an inch at a time like a man breaking ice before him with a stick, grim and patient, hearing in the distance the sea, and in the near place the slow, sweet hush of water steaming against stone.